This is Guy Lawrence, and of course, you're listening to the Guy Lawrence podcast, where each week I have awesome conversations with awesome people that go well beyond conventional health, wealth, and wisdom to inspire us to create change in our lives. And this week, I am doing something a little bit different, and it is episode 50. So, because it's episode 50, which is a huge accomplishment in my eyes this year since I launched the Guy Lawrence podcast, I'm taking a trip down memory lane and reflecting and looking back. And I've selected some of my favorite episodes and little snippets and a little bit in between stories behind each one, why they've made the hit list. And I've selected 6. Now, trust me, out of 49 other episodes, it was a mammoth task to me to whittle it down and choose 6 to share with you. And my wish is to hopefully inspire you to maybe listen to a podcast that you haven't listened to before, or even go back and re-listen to it again, because there's so many nuggets of wisdom in there. And I'm so proud to be a part of this and putting this creation out into the world, not only for myself, but obviously for you guys to be sharing and listening to. So the ones I've selected are literally the ones that have just made a huge impression on me, like sat with me for days, or there's been something that I've gone on and used, or there's been just something that was like I least expected it. There's been a couple of guests on that I really didn't know what to expect, and they've just blown my mind, and I really connected with them and resonated with them. You know, this what I'm doing with this episode is something I did on my previous podcast, the 180 Nutrition Health Sessions, where I used to reflect and stitch it together. It's currently New Year's Eve 2018 when I've been wrapping this up before myself and my wife go out and celebrate the 2019 tonight. And I think we can quite often forget to look back at all the good we've done during the year because we get so caught up and busy. And for me, this is just a little nice thing I like to do and help pat myself on the back and say, God, look at what you've produced this year and what's come out. And because we all forget, right? We all forget what to do. So this has been a nice little way for me to do that. And when I started the podcast in February of 2018, I'd stepped down from 180 Nutrition by then. It was a big deal for me at the time after 8 years. And, the podcast had reached over 3 million downloads when I stepped down from that. And it was just a very strange time, but it was something I really wanted to follow my heart in, hence why, let it in and just sort of trust that bigger force that can be behind us all, that we kind of know that's there, but we forget to tap into it. And I just wanted to see what happened. And then being interviewing by myself for the first time is strange, because I was always, in a partnership, and there's always 2 of us doing an interview. So I always never forget when I reached out to Chris Kresser. It was the first person I reached out to because I loved the interview I did with him originally. With 180, and to have a very different conversation outside of health. He agreed to come on, and I remember interviewing him, Dawson Church and Lynn McTaggart were some of the first interviews I did, and I just loved it. And then it just snowballed from there. So there's a lot of amazing names that I can't believe and haven't even made the list today that I'd urge you to check out. Well, Chris Kress is one of them, Amit Goswami, the physicist, Thomas Campbell, the NASA physicist. Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. Who else? There's been so many. Trevor Hendy was another one. Like there's just been so many amazing interviews. But I had to cull it down, and I didn't want to go past 6 because this podcast would take forever. And I wanted to hopefully inspire you to listen to each one and then maybe go back and check out a few. And in between each of the 6, I give a little bit of a background of why they're in my top 6. Anyway, let's go over to the first one. Enjoy. First one I wanted to bring you was my guest, Bill Bennett. Now, I honestly, Bill, I reached out to him. Now, he's the guy behind the documentary, the PGS, my personal guidance system, and it's all about intuition. And I reached out to Bill, and he's just this super grounded, down-to-earth Aussie bloke, and being a Welshman and listening to his Aussiness come through was just wonderful. but it really, I didn't see it coming. I didn't know what to expect. I watched the documentary. I loved the documentary. Like, make sure you go and check it out if you haven't seen it, the PGS Personal Guidance System documentary, because it's fabulous. It's now available on, I don't know, but you can rent it, watch it. It's out there, and it's a really great entry point into this. And what was great about Bill was he's so grounded, like he doesn't get caught up in the fluff or anything, but what came of it was so inspiring, and the way he went about making this movie was tremendously inspiring. And I wanted to share a clip with you that we can all relate to it and we all fantasize about it, but Bill was like walking the talk, and it was just wonderful. So let's enjoy this clip with Bill Bennett. What blew me away, because when I was researching you yesterday as well, Bob, was the thoroughness of the amount of footage and filming you did to construct this documentary together. So when you started to make the movie, did you, like, I'm assuming if you're following your intuition, like, did you know how many speakers you were going to interview at the time, or like, how did you go about finding them?
Well, look, after that dream, and having made a decision to make the film, the one thing that intuitively I knew is that I had to go to India. I had to start in India, because I knew that I knew nothing, and that probably in India I would start to learn some stuff. And so, I had no money, no money in the budget to make the movie or anything like that. So, but I went out and, my wife and I put in some savings. We went out and bought a camera, booked some tickets to India, and started there. And I didn't have a clue who I was going to talk to, how many people it was, and I didn't know how long the filming was going to take. All I knew was that I had to start. And here's another story, right? There's a little bit of sensibility in me, really, as a filmmaker. And so having chipped in our own money and, started the process, I thought, well, bloody hell, I should see if I can line up some people in India beforehand. I get on the phone. I've been to India before, and I've actually worked there before, so I knew some people. And I called them up and I said, do you know people? Can I come and talk to them? And can I come and talk to you, and so forth? I kept on getting no, block, 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 block. Anyway, so I'm on the plane with my wife. It's just the two of us, right? And she turns to me and she says, we're going to be landing in Mumbai soon. You don't have anybody to talk to, do you? And I went, no, I don't. Anyway, so we're in the back of the cab. We arrived in Mumbai, and we're in the back of the cab, heading to the hotel that I booked. I've got this sort of really kind of cold, sweaty kind of dread, going, what am I doing? I'm starting this film, and what am I going to do? Sit around the pool and, eat samosas? What's going on here? Anyway, at that moment, guys, really, really interesting. What happened was I had in my mind's eye this image of a billboard that I'd seen by the highway on the way in from the airport to the city. And the billboard, I could see it very, very clearly, was advertising the Bombay Yoga Institute with a telephone number and so forth underneath. And I thought, okay, well, look, I'll contact them. So I had my trusty iPad and roaming in the back of the cab. And so literally from the back of the cab, I Googled Bombay Yoga Institute, and up it came, and the telephone number. I called them from the back of the cab, and I said, look, I'm a filmmaker from Australia. I'm making a film on intuition. Can I come and speak to the director? And they said, yeah, sure, come in the next day. All right, so I had my first interview lined up just from the back of the cab there, based on this image of my seeing this billboard. But anyway, so the taxi continued through to the hotel. I never saw the billboard. I thought, that's strange. They must have taken it down. Anyway, so I got to the institute, the Bombay Yoga Institute, the next day, and there is the billboard outside the front entrance, exactly as I'd seen it in my mind's eye. And I thought, yeah, that's what I'd seen. So I did the interview with the director, wonderful lady, and she's in the movie. And at the end of it, I said, what happened to the billboard that you had up by the highway coming in from the airport? And she said, we never had a billboard there. And I said, you must have, because I've seen it before. And she said, no. No, we've never had a billboard other than, the one outside our front entrance. Well, I'd never been to the Bombay Yoga Institute before. I'd never even been to that part of Bombay before, so it was not possible for me to have seen that billboard outside their front entrance. But what had happened was that precognitively, I had got this flash of that billboard outside that entrance. So my guidance had taken me to that place for me to start. It was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. It's one of several things that, several very, very strange things that have happened to me in the making of the film. But what happened though, Guy, was this. After having done that interview with a lady who was really wonderful, she's one of the sort of key people in the yoga, Hindu, religion, whatever, in India, she then put me onto somebody at the ashram in Rishikesh, Paramath Nikatan ashram. They then put me onto other people and so forth. And really, from that first interview with that director at that Bombay Yoga Institute, I didn't stop. I just went from person to person to person to person. And the same thing happened in America when I went to America. I was guided from one person to the other. I never had a list. I never, I just, and so look, sometimes I was given access to people. Like, for instance, I was given access to Bikram Chowdhury, from Bikram Yoga. For some reason or other, I had a no on him. And I went, no, I'm not going to follow this. Well, he turned out to be, not a very nice man.
Yeah.
I'm pleased he's done the film. But it was really interesting. I got a no on him. And he would have been a big name in the movie.
Amazing.
At the time. So whilst I was guided to people like James Van Praagh and Carolyn Mace and Lee Carroll and so forth, I was also guided away from people who weren't the right energetic fit for the film.
That's phenomenal. And surely, like, after a start like that, when you rock up thinking, what the hell am I doing here? And then it just opens up like that by following it.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary. The funny thing is now I've seen the film obviously, hundreds of times, and I sometimes stand in the back of the cinema and I watch the film play out and I go, how did this happen? How did this bloody well happen? Sometimes I say at Q&As, I take no ownership of this movie. You got to understand, I take no authorship of it.
That's incredible. How many people end up being in the movie?
In the movie, there are 26 people. I ended up interviewing 76 in total, so 50 people hit the editing room floor. I shot 120 hours of material. I ended up using a bit under 90 minutes. So there was a lot of footage that I didn't use. But I've got to say, Guy, for all the people that I interviewed, I learned from every one of them, and my overall understanding of intuition and knowledge of intuition was informed by everybody that I did interview, even those that didn't make the film.
That's next awesome guest is Karen Smith. Now, boy, this episode sat with me for a long time afterwards. I'd known of Karen for many years. Actually, a good friend of mine is a good friend of hers, but that's as far as it went. I remember my wife raving about Karen quite a number of years ago, saying, you've got to read her book, The Soul Survivor. Like, she was just, and it was one of those things, I get around to it, but I never really checked it out, you know what I mean? And what happened was, as I was doing this podcast, I just felt the urge to reach out. I thought Karen sounds like a perfect fit for the podcast that I want to move forward, because ultimately my message is that I think we all have the ability to live our best life and create that change. But boy, Karen's story, like, we touch on it a little bit, but if you don't know much about it, she was caught up in the Bali bombing and back in 2002, and she actually went there to commit suicide herself, and she survived all this, and she just, the journey between on, there's so many things. It is absolutely breathtaking, and the way she looks at life now and the positivity that she's putting out into the world, and she's living life fearlessly. And did I say that even right? God, I mumble. And she's just a beacon of light for other people, and it's so important to what she's doing. And when I got off that podcast, I was like, wow, what a legend, what a lady, 100% respect. And that's why Karen Smith is up next.
I think the biggest advice I'd give to everybody is stop listening to everybody's opinions. and go in and find that it's all already always been in there. We just have a better relationship with the turmoil on the surface than what we do with the stillness that's been there permanently. And it's kind of a rule, you know, about anything that's real, is that it must be permanent. It can't be temporary.
Yes.
So thoughts are temporary, emotions are temporary, beliefs are temporary, experiences are temporary, even love can be temporary. So in order for anything to be real, it must be permanent. And so that's why I say there's very little that we actually know. And, you know, some of the questions that you're going to ask me, I'm only going to give you my thought system on it, my opinion on it, but will it all be truth? No. You know, it's we can't know. And I think that's where a lot of us fall down, is because we're not willing to sit in the I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's only, as you said before, do we have to go through something? I think we have to go through I don't know. And we have to be willing to sit in the I don't know. And the only gateway that we have to go through for that is the gateway of the ego, because the ego must know. The ego refuses to not know. It must know. And if it doesn't know, it'll go hunting, it'll go finding, and it'll go looking. But the truth, the ultimate truth that exists inside of us, the ultimate self, the effortless self, no, it doesn't seek. It's actually quite silent.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It was only yesterday I was listening, because I'm interviewing Anita Mojani in the morning, actually.
Oh.
Beautiful woman. And I was listening to her being interviewed yesterday, and she was talking about these very things. And it triggered something, because she said she was affected by an Indian guru at a young age that put her opinions on her. And that shaped her life about certain beliefs about herself that she believes have formed her illness.
Yeah, right.
From it. And she said the greatest teachers of our times are the ones that reveal the tools to allow us to look within and find the power within us and make our own choices of that free will, as opposed to, like, exactly like you said, listening to everyone else and taking their opinions and putting it as gospel. You know, it really is an inside job.
And I think, Guy, you know, everybody has their path. Everybody has their journey. I've not been somebody that's had teachers. And it's been in every area of my life, actually, in my work and my business and so on. I've had experiences, and I'm happy to share my story with you as to how I've achieved or how I've not achieved, that's really the wrong word, how I've arrived to this place. But I think that everybody has their catalysts, and some of us don't actually have a guru or a teacher to impart this knowledge. Some of us, like I said earlier, get a quickening in the heart where we say, it's not enough. It's not enough. Everything I've done, everything I've created, everything I've achieved, it still leaves me empty. It's like I'm looking for my answers in an infinitely dark room, and I'll never find them. And I think it's not until, and that's just certainly my own experience, in that it wasn't until I kind of got that looking to the world for my money, my happiness, my partner, my house, my car, my animals, all of those sorts of things. It was what everybody does. And of course, it's been a fantastic life, and I wouldn't change a thing of it. But that never brought me what I intrinsically and ultimately have searched for since I was a kid. I remember this deep longing from the age of 3, and it never was fulfilled. And then when I finally realized that all of the world was here, that was outside. The direct opposite of that is inside. So what does it look like if I look inside? Because shit, I mean, everybody says go inside, go inside. Look inside, you'll find all of your answers inside. They're all inside. Oh, crap, they're not. You know, it was just like this, well, I don't know what's in there. What are you talking about? Where do I look? What am I supposed to do? You know, and even that in and of itself, I think that when you talk about teachers and gurus, I think that's where they come into their own, because that's where people like you and with what you're trying to do with this podcast, that's where you kind of, you know, you give people a map of the territory. You know, they've still got to walk the path, but you give them the map of the territory that they can do it. You know, they can find their answers inside with a little bit of guidance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How much do you think your experience then with your journey and with Bali and everything sort of shaped you looking at this work from a different perspective?
Well, it's kind of like layers of an onion, Guy. So I was my partner committed suicide in 2001. We'd been together for 8 years, and he was in the movie industry. And our relationship was really struggling back then. And unfortunately, his answer was to take his life. And, you know, I'll never understand the depths of what his suffering was. I thought I knew. But all I could know was my own suffering from that. And so that put me into a spiral of suicidal depression for about 6 years. But the year after he took his life, I was suicidal, and I went to Bali to take my own life, and landed in Bali on the 12th of October 2002, which is the date of the 2002 Bali bombing. I went with 2 girlfriends of mine. They were both killed. And my skull was crushed on the top left-hand side of my skull. And, you know, what's really interesting, as a result of those experiences, I've become a professional speaker. So I'm really excited to say that I'm Australia's most experienced speaker. So that's really a lovely title to hold. And I feel like I've only just started. And most of my work now is in the States and also in the UK. So that's really, really cool. I enjoy that a lot. But I think as time has gone by, I think the story that I tell has changed because my relationship to it has changed. See, I remember initially I was sharing my story from the context of what actually happened. You know, I jumped down this hole, I climbed up this rope, and the flames burnt my back, etc. But what was really present when I look at myself as a piece of life and a piece of consciousness, what was happening for me during Bali. And I never really had the words to this because there was no one like you that I could have these conversations with and not feel like a complete fruitcake.
Yeah.
But I remember standing on the street in Bali, and my head was crushed, but I didn't know. And I could feel, bear with me, I still even get nervous saying it, but I could feel the vibration of the street underneath my feet. I could feel the fish in the ocean. I could feel them in my hands. I could feel the stars in the sky with a prickly twinkle. I could feel the light of them. I could feel the roar of the ocean. I could hear the voices, the muffled voices for miles. I could feel the trees. I could feel the pain. I could feel people's pain in the tips of my fingers. And I remember standing and finding my way over to a lady who was sitting on the side of the street, and she was so badly burnt. And I sat next to her, and you know what's really bizarre is as I sat next to her, all the pain in my fingers went. And she passed away. She took her last breath and she passed away just as I sat next to her. But all the pain in my fingers went. And I thought that was just so strange. Why did the pain go when I sat with her? And then I was taken to a hospital, and I sat between this fellow, and he was lying down, and there was just no space. I mean, there were people everywhere. And this fellow was completely naked, but black, charred, charcoaled. And I sat down, not realizing I was actually sitting between his legs and his feet, actually. So his feet were on either side of my hips. And as I turned around to see who was behind me, he put his head up and he winked at me. And at this stage, my whole body was completely numb. My mind was so vacant. All I could remember, so strange, I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember my phone number. I couldn't remember my mum or my dad. I couldn't remember their phone numbers. But I could remember my very first boss. I go figure. I don't know. But I couldn't remember anything else. It was like I just completely left the building, 100% left the building. But there was, I could see everything, you know. I mean, I could see all the people and I could hear all of the moaning. And then they put me up on a table and they gave me 38 staples in my head without anesthetic.
Oh.
I never felt a thing, Guy. Not a thing. There was no pain. I just heard it, but I never felt it. It was just such a really unusual experience. And I think, you know, now I'm even having this conversation with you. I think that the evolution of that experience is starting to become very real for me. And about 6 years ago, I began to study Eastern philosophy and Advaita Vedanta.
Okay.
And it gave me a lot of answers that, you know, I really tried to get from A Course in Miracles, and I really tried to get from all the different ancient texts, because I really felt that modern spirituality and modern mysticism really didn't have my message. It didn't really have my answers. So I wanted to go to ancient wisdom and ancient mysticism. And I found all of my answers about this direct experience and ultimate truth. And, you know, now I see Brandon Bayes, you know, Byron Katie, Anita Morjani, you know, like Wayne Dyer. It's been prolific for years. It's just that it hasn't had a platform like it has now, you know.
This legendary guest is Joshua Mance. Now, Joshua, it kind of falls in the same vein as Karen Smith. Like, it's one of these stories that you can't even compute sometimes. But I literally stumbled across Josh. He wrote a book that was released, The Beauty of a Darker Soul, earlier this year. And for some reason connected through, I think, from Breath Expert Dan Brule, that's another fantastic podcast, by the way. I just saw it, and for some reason it just resonated with me. So I reached out to Joshua, and the next thing I know, he's coming on my podcast. So I literally stumbled across him, felt right, reached out, and he came on, and he made a huge impact. I remember I was, myself and my wife were literally about to drive south. I was going to run a Let It In workshop, you know, about 6-8 hours away, and I squeezed the podcast in early in the morning because he was in the US, and he jumped on, and I walked off that just going, holy shit, like, this guy is just, his energy was so amazing. It was so sincere. It was so raw. He was just like, he just wants to get this message out there, and it's phenomenal. And I find myself sharing his story quite often, you know, because he represents courage in a way that you would never think. And just to cut a long story short, he was a platoon leader, and in Afghanistan he got shot by a sniper, and essentially he ended up dying and flatlined for 15 minutes, and he was resuscitated and came back, but it's the integration of what goes on in his life afterwards, and the things that he thought were happening, he then reflected back many years later and could actually see the lessons in it and where he is now. I certainly encourage you to check out his work. He's a legendary guy, and we just go and pick up a little bit of the story right now. So let's go over to Joshua Mance. Perception had changed. What amazed me about that night and really resonated with me and what I'm about and what I'm doing with Let It In and my project and everything was the random chain of events and coincidences that happened on the day, from a 19-year-old kid saving your life to the big guy doing the CPR, you know, and the defibrillator and all that. Can you just walk us through all these kind of things that happened on that day? I was blown away when I heard that.
Yeah, it still gives me chills to talk about this. You know, after I got shot, my you know, one of the beautiful things about this experience is I was conscious and remember all of it. Wow. And to be able to witness this medical team just perform so brilliantly in the face of adversity was I think it's a privilege to be able to witness that. You know, and like you said, the medic that day was only 19 years old. The first person who showed up, like literally on the scene, who was with us during the patrol. And it's a 19-year-old here who had to make a very conscious, deliberate choice of who he was going to try to save and who was going to die. You know, Marlon had a severed aorta. I had a severed femoral. We both had less than 2 minutes to live, and he had a fraction of a second to make that decision. And, you know, objectively, from a medical standpoint, from a triage standpoint, he made the right decision riding with me, because I had a slightly better chance of survival than did Marlon Harper, the other person who was shot. But, you know, it's still that 19-year-old who's going to have to live with the moral weight of that choice for the rest of his life. And, but anyway, he just did it perfectly, cinched up a tourniquet. They loaded me in the vehicle. And a few minutes later, I was greeted by an expert trauma team, an expert medical team, who performed the most well-rehearsed drill I've ever seen in my life. It was like watching a choreographed dance, just executed perfectly, where every single person on that team had a very clear job. They worked as a cohesive unit. It was one of those things that just really drove home for me what it really means to be part of a team, right?
Yeah, wow.
But I didn't understand just how heroic their efforts were until after the fact, and it's even unfolding more and more to this day. But to set the context, I mean, back then, you know, it was kind of standard for medical teams and ER teams to call it on a patient around the 6-minute mark, because that's the point where catastrophic brain damage starts to set in. And something prompted this team to go for 15 straight minutes and defy all the odds. And when I returned to Baghdad a couple months later, I had the opportunity to thank them in person. Amazing. For the work, which is one of the best days of my life. And I asked the surgeon one question. It's like, why did you work on a dead guy for 15 minutes? What made you do it? And without hesitating, he gave me a 3-word response and said, "We never quit." Now, it's just, now obviously there would have been a point where they would have had to call it if they didn't pull me back, but it still embodies this warrior spirit that we find all over the world, you know, in people.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting with the CPR as well. I did my bronze medallion at the surf club, you know, 5-6 years ago back here, and we had to perform CPR on one of the dummies. You know, fortunately, I've never had to do it on a real person, but like after a minute, 2 minutes, I was shot, absolutely shot, and then you exchange over. Now you were saying the guy that was performing CPR on you did it for 15 straight minutes.
Yep. And believe it or not, I did not know this. I did not know the full story until a couple months ago.
Oh, wow.
And it was a result of publishing the book. One of the medics reached out and filled in even more detail for me, and it just blew me away, man. So the place that mind you, we were in the middle of Baghdad, right? So this is I was evacuated to a very rogue, what they call a level 2 care facility, which basically just has the most rudimentary life-saving equipment. And I was basically laying on a cot in the operating room. And for some reason, the cot was elevated too high and they weren't able to get it down in time. And the only person that was capable of reaching me in order to do CPR just happened to be a 6'5", 260-pound former football lineman named Tipton. And he was literally standing on a cardboard box filled with MREs, you know, those prepackaged meals that soldiers eat. And it was literally this one person, because he was the only guy capable of reaching me, who did chest compressions for a full 15 minutes straight. You know, and they just told me how he was just pouring sweat the whole time, just never gave up, never stopped for a second. And as you just said, anyone who's done CPR for more than 3 minutes, I don't care what kind of physical condition you're in. Yeah. It's like a hardcore anaerobic workout. So, I mean, that's just one thing. If he wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't be here. The defibrillator paddles that they used to shock me back to life literally arrived at that base that very morning. and they had to take them out of the plastic in order to use them on me because they were so new. You know, the vascular surgeon in the green zone performed a perfect vascular surgery the first shot out the gate, and administered nearly 30 units of blood to save my life.
Wow.
You know, your body only holds about 6 or 7, right? So I kept bleeding it out, I guess, during the surgery, and they were taking blood straight out of people's arms and doing a direct transfusion into me, just as a last ditch effort to save my life. So the synchronicity of all of these things coming together to happen, and then even more ironically, to wake up with no trace of brain damage, like none at all, to not lose my leg. You know, they were able to even save my leg, which was a miracle in and of itself, and to make a full recovery from this, you know, and both physically and ultimately emotionally, which is an ongoing journey, right? But
yeah,
there's a lot of things to think about in that.
Oh, totally, mate, totally. And I've been contemplating when I first heard that. It's just incredible. And I got to ask you, next awesome guest is Lynn McTaggart, who is a best-selling author. And at the end of the day, I just have so much respect for this lady. She is an investigative journalist. She's been on, I don't know, sticking her neck out. You know, the moment we start to want to create change or have different theories about things, and that's going against the current accepted things in society, if you like, we tend to want to throw rocks at them, and it takes a lot of courage, I think, to really start to look at and always be on the forefront of things and start challenging the current status of everything. And Lynn, for me, is one of those ladies. She's written exceptional books all the way back from a breakthrough book called The Field, where she went and researched a lot about quantum physics and interviewed quantum physicists and what is actually going on. And I think her books are actually going to definitely influence him. I mean, they've had a huge influence me over the years, and it's because of Lynn McTaggart and people like that has allowed me to really understand and delve into this work at a much deeper level, and then bring it to what I'm doing with Let It In. And one of the things she in a recent book she wrote called The Power of 8, and about 8 people coming together and actually using your intention and your thoughts magnified with the power of the heart to actually influence change in people, and even to the fact of healing. Like, when you first kind of hear this stuff, you'd go, nah, that's nonsense, that's woo-woo, like, you know, that's in the realm of what they do up here in Byron Bay kind of thing. But jokes aside, seriously, her work is phenomenal, her research is phenomenal, and it's certainly got me curious, and it's got us to the fact that we're actually starting to, you know, been doing this work with Let It In, because I had quite a bit of experience with this work over the last few years especially, and she's been such an influence. So I couldn't put her best of, and to actually be able to, you know, have a great conversation with her, look at the facts and what's actually going on in the scientific world. Yeah, I couldn't do a podcast without having Lynn in it. So let's go over to Lynn. Enjoy.
You know, we're always looking at the medical research. So back in the early 90s, when, you know, we had just got this newsletter off the ground, I kept coming across very good studies of things like spiritual healing. And I kept thinking to myself, wait a minute, if you can send a thought to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the world works and how we work. So I set out to try to find out why. And I thought initially, well, I'll speak to some frontier scientists who are doing work in this, in consciousness and things, and they'll tell me there's something like human energy fields, and I'll write it up, and that'll be that, you know, and I'll hand it in, and job done. Well, it wasn't like that at all. What I discovered, and was shocked to discover, was that each of these people, each of these scientists had discovered a tiny piece of what compounded into a completely new view of the world. Nevertheless, as scientists, they don't like to stray beyond their own experimental evidence. They don't want to speculate on what this all means. What's the big picture? And they also don't know how to decode it into real English. You know, they speak in code, they speak in math.
Totally.
So it was my job really to try to decode what they were talking about and then to synthesize it and put it all together. So I did. And that book really did change the messenger. That book really set me on this journey because I realized we are very different from what we've been told. The newest science is telling a very different scientific story. And that science, in fact, is just a story. You know, we act as though it's this finite truth, and that a lot of our story has already been written, but new chapters come along all the time that rewrite the chapters that came before. So this new chapter, loads of chapters are now being written. It's just extraordinary what's being discovered. And so that really changed my view of the world. But there was one part of it that was quite, excuse me, a little bit of unfinished business for me, which was the whole idea that thoughts are a thing that affect other things. There was plenty of scientific evidence about this, but I kept thinking to myself, you know, and this was the time where we were hearing a lot about the law of attraction, early part of the millennium.
Okay.
You know, that and The Secret and things like that. But I, as a reporter by training, had a lot of inconvenient questions, like, how far can we take this? You know, are we talking about just shifting a quantum particle by a fraction, or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? You know, and also, what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time? So I decided to put it to the ultimate test. And I set up a thing called the intention experiment. Because I thought, well, I've got lots of readers. The field was in 30 languages. And I thought, well, and I also know a lot of these scientists now from writing the field and doing consciousness research. If I just put them together, I'll have the biggest global laboratory in the world. So that's what we did. But I was suspicious. I didn't really think it was going to work. I wrote in a lot of qualifiers in my book, The Intention Experiment, which was, you know, not only a book about intention, but an invitation to take part in this thing. But we've run 30 to date where we've got the experimental results. And of those 30, 26 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects.
I got to ask you, Lynn, how would you define intention?
Okay, that's a great question. A lot of people think of intention as that focused thought we have when we, you know, are in a meditative state. We send it, and that's the one thing the universe hears. But, you know, the science shows that we are at our lowest level, not a batch of electrical signaling and chemistry, but a network of quantum relationships, of quantum frequency. And that our thoughts are another kind of frequency that gets sent out and heard. I mean, there's certainly a lot of evidence from the work of, say, the late Fritz Albert Popp, a German physicist, showing that we send out a tiny current of light. He called them biophoton emissions. And other living things send that light back synchronicitously. So you and I are not just having a conversation, we're having a conversation of light as well, sending back and forth. So the bottom line is we are all leaky buckets. We are all sending and receiving all the time. And there is other evidence demonstrating that thoughts aren't locked inside our head, but are being transmitted, and also we are receiving back. So we're like a television set and a television station, all rolled into one. We're senders and receivers. Our brains are essentially a receiving and transmitting mechanism.
Yeah, it's
for this constant conversation.
It's incredible. It's incredible. What fantastic guest coming up is Pete Evans. Now, I interviewed Pete back on the 180 Nutrition podcast several years ago, and at the time Pete was kind of under a lot of media scrutiny with the paleo way and all that was coming out, and he kind of got pigeonholed and labeled at the time in that area. But you know, myself working in the industry and so forth, you kind of look at things very differently. And when I put this new podcast out, I really wanted to get Pete back on because I just felt there was this other side to Pete that, I don't know, not many people would hear, or maybe Pete doesn't have the platform, but he has gone on since, and he started his own brilliant podcast, which I tune into weekly as well. But when Pete came on, I still wasn't quite sure what I was going to get. But I certainly trusted my intuition, and I respect and love everything about Pete and what he does. And when he came on, he was amazing. Like, he was just so humble and so articulate, and just really spoke from the heart. And that's what it's all about, right? And the other thing I wanted to mention with Pete as well was, when I wanted to interview him, I didn't want to talk about the kitchen. I didn't want to talk about, the paleo way or all that. That was my old world. I really wanted to just have a conversation and see where it went. And it went deep. It went really deep, really fast. And I loved every minute of it. So that's why Pete has made it to my best of 2018. Anyway, let's go over to Pete Evans.
From my perspective, or my perception, is we are all just beings of energy. We're all just expressions of energy. And I'm not religious, so in any state, in any description that I'm about to give, but we're all part of the universal consciousness, and that universal consciousness is expressing itself now, and we are all part of that. There's no separation. We just believe there's separation. So I'm looking at you. You're just a different version of that universal consciousness, or some people would use the word God, and everybody is that, playing that role out simultaneously, but we're all the same. We're just having a different experience with our different identities that makes us feel that we are separate, even though we're all connected.
Yeah.
So it's, and as that guy you were just talking about, looking inside, you will discover that we are just these beings of unconditional love, trust, and acceptance. It's just that our filters of the world that we've set up to protect us mask our true nature. And looking inside, you will discover that there's some truths and realizations that are frightening for us. But also, once we start to dig a little bit deeper, it can be the most powerful, life-changing, encouraging aspects to us. And we all have that element of darkness and shadow and light. I mean, and through my own work with plant medicines and entheogens, you discover that. And it's very hard to put it into language, but when you have an experience of everything, a non-dual experience, and what you can access that through different states of consciousness, whether it be through breathing practices or meditation or fasting rituals, or through these entheogens, especially the Bufo alvarius toad, which has a 5-MeO-DMT. Once you have that experience, you have the experience of everything, which is, the experience is not just light and love, it's death and decay and destruction and everything all happening at once in no particular point in time either. So it's everything. And I'm looking at your t-shirt and it says, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." The universe, and that could be universal consciousness is exactly right. It's everything.
Yeah.
So nirvana for me, or that state of samadhi, is, and once you've experienced it, it isn't just pure love and light, it's everything. We have and human beings have the capacity to experience all. We have the capacity to hurt. We have the capacity to kill. We have the capacity to love. We have the capacity to heal. We have the capacity to do everything.
Next phenomenal guest is Kerwin Ray. Now, I'll be honest, I was like, oh, I wanted to get Kerwin in, I wanted to get Greg Braden in, I wanted to get Tom Campbell in, I wanted to get Amit Goswami in, I wanted to get Trevor Hendy in. Like, there's all these phenomenal guests that I wanted to come in, and I whittled it down between Kerwin and Greg Braden, but Greg was a very recent podcast, so that's the only reason why I guess Greg didn't make the whole overall cut. But Kerwin, he's had such an impact in my personal life, because I was watching him from afar for a while, and he's just putting out all this phenomenal social media content and this nuggets of wisdom. And he's not only gone on to create a lot of abundance and success in his business life, but he's so raw and open and honest. And I just knew he loves these kind of conversations and topics that I'm really passionate around, especially around quantum physics and everything else. But so I thought, I'm going to reach out to Kerwin. I'm going to see if he'll come on the show. I know he's a busy boy and all the rest of it, but look, he made some time out to join me on the podcast, which just shows the stature of the man anyway. And from that, we had a wonderful, inspiring conversation. And there was an analogy in there called the feather brick truck approach. And I've loved that. And I've kind of borrowed that in the workshop since, but always acknowledge Kerwin for it. But it's just brilliant. The guy's humble. He's doing great things in the world. And that's why Kerwin is in my best of for 2018.
That sent me on this pathway of, I basically traveled the world looking for myself. And it's, again, similar scenario. I went into Burleigh Head's flight center, and I said to the chick behind the counter, where are the most spiritual destinations on the planet? Because I was really trying to find myself, because I've been sampling from the buffet, and nothing was was really hitting the palate and giving me a sense of fulfillment from what I was trying. And I thought, well, maybe if I go on this spiritual journey that I hear about people taking, and I went to Machu Picchu, the cradle of life, and all these sacred spiritual sites in Africa and South America and Turkey. And yeah, and I was almost like I was waiting for some monk to fucking roll out from behind a temple and go, I've been waiting for you. I literally, I even tried to go to a monastery in China where, they don't take foreigners.
Wow.
And basically become a monk for 3 years, but they wouldn't take me because I didn't speak Mandarin. And I was just really looking. And I still remember coming back from this. It was supposed to be 6 months, ended up being like 7 or 8 months. And I was landing in Sydney at the time. And the moment the wheels of the jumbo jet hit the skids on the runway, I remember just something flashing into me and going, oh my God, you've just been looking in the wrong place. I've been looking outside, I've been looking in things, places, people. And what I realized in that moment is what I was actually looking for, which was, I guess, happiness. It was an inside job the whole way along. And it was from that point I started going inwards, and I started becoming a lot more intentional. I started becoming a lot more deliberate. I started really listening to my instincts a lot more rather than negating them. And at first I didn't make as much money as what I had in the past, because it was really almost like a test of purpose. But I just kept on, but everything, the things that I was doing, they felt good. It tasted good. It was giving me satiation. It was giving me more of the right kind of appetite. I wasn't having a taste of it and then coming back feeling still hungry. I was having a taste of it, and I'd finish the end of the day. And sometimes I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was sitting back and going, but man, I feel really good.
Yeah.
Happy. And then over time, and I think this is sometimes what's challenging for most people, is that sometimes even when you find what you want, whether that be in life or a relationship or commercially, we do still have to go through a period of trial, a period of tribulation to really bear the fruits of the harvest that we're sowing in that time.
Amazing. I'm just nodding my head in agreement here, because I just sold my half of a company of 8 years that had done well. And it was the biggest decision I ever had to make, but I felt I wasn't on purpose. And I've taken that step backwards, Kerwin. And it's been the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Like, really? It's incredible, mate. Why do you think we wait? Like, why do you think we're always looking externally for answers? Because I believe you've been in a fortunate position to actually achieve the success and then go, actually, maybe this was where a lot of people, I think a lot of us can be trying to get there, but never actually reach it. So we're constantly in that hamster wheel. I mean, yeah, why do you think we do that and fall into that trap?
I think Jim Carrey says it best. I think he says, I wish everyone could achieve all of their financial and fame goals that they've ever wanted so that they could realize that that's not it. And I think, we're herd, but we're herd animals, we're mammals. And we often look to our environment to tell us what to do, and we look to the herd to tell us what to do. And, you know, culturally, we are very much conditioned to look to the TV, to look to the silver screen, to look to celebrity for what is supposed to be right, what is supposed to be normal, what is supposed to be good, what's supposed to be pretty, what's supposed to be healthy. And as a result, we often get wound up in the celebrity of what we see. And I don't necessarily mean the celebrity of celebrities as a people, but the celebrity of the authority that is given to the things that have attention. You know, the Insta mindset, the Instagram mindset, the microwave mindset, where people think that things should come easy, they should come fast. And when we're in a world that is so outwardly directed, you know, we grow up in a world that is so outwardly directed, depending on the community that you're in, you know, it often just becomes, well, isn't that just what we do? And it's not until, you know, something, someone, or some experience comes into our life and often wakes us up, which is usually in the form of pain. And, you know, and I call it feathers, bricks, and trucks. You know, sometimes a little feather will give you a little bit of a tickle on the face, and you'll sit there and you'll be like, oh, what's that? Oh my God. Oh, okay, I've got this sensation. I've got this something that's there. Oh, I'll just ignore it. And then, you know, all of a sudden, then something comes in and goes donk, and you're like, oh, what's that all about? Oh, I'll just ignore it. And then before you know it, a fucking Mack truck comes and it mows you down. And, you know, that's often how purpose can work. And I think the more, because there's in tune with purpose and then there's on purpose. And I think when you start becoming in tune with purpose, you start getting the feathers, the bricks, and the trucks. And that being in tune, and those signals are really designed to get you on purpose. And the more in tune and off purpose you are, the more of these messages you're going to start getting.
Yeah.
And then the more in tune and on purpose you're going to get, the more flow we experience, the more effortless it becomes. But there will be a test. You know, it's oftentimes the universe, as we sometimes refer to, will give us a little bit of okay, you're on the right path. Let me give you some breadcrumbs to let you know you're on the right path. Okay, great. You're on it. You got some momentum. Okay, now I'm just going to turn the resistance wheel up a little bit so that you can now build some muscles that you need to in order to fulfill, you know, your potential with your purpose. Because purpose, like anything, requires fulfillment. And with anything, any form of potential to be realized or fulfilled, there is an element of strength that's required. And whether it be in a relationship or within ourselves or within an entrepreneurial pursuit, strength must be built. Whether it in a meditation, strength and discipline must be built. In a relationship, strength and discipline must be built. And the only way that we develop strength and discipline, which ultimately gives us resilience and grit, is through the increasing of resistance. And sometimes I think the challenge is we think, oh, yeah, again, you see these spiritually egotistical people who are just constantly looking for flow state. And like, for me, I just don't think that that's the whole truth. I think it's partially the truth. But if you've got these people that are constantly looking for flow, the moment they get resistance, they run in the opposite direction. They sometimes miss the opportunities that resistance will give them in the form of building strength and resilience and building ultimately grit.
Yeah. Last of the best of 2018. And by the way, these were in no particular order. I've just kind of grabbed them and dropped them in. But the last one to make my sixth was actually Anita Mojani. Now, I first heard her story a few years ago. And I remember thinking, no way. Wow. Because it kind of challenges the whole current paradigm about who we are, what consciousness is, and around it. And you know, she was, again, such a sweetheart. She's so humble. If you don't know her story, like, it's amazing. But in a nutshell, she had cancer. She was riddled with cancer. She was on her last dying deathbed. She went into a coma, I think, for 5 days, but she could recall the whole thing. And then went beyond that and became part of everything and everyone and part of the greater consciousness system. And then anyway, she lived to tell the tale. Her cancer cleared up within like 6 weeks and defied all evidence. And it's all based on evidence as well. They've got all the records and everything. And she came out and wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. And it went on and sold millions of copies, as you can imagine. But her whole story and her whole message now is about living life fearlessly. And she's just a champion. I loved her interview. I loved her, what she stands for, regardless of whether you believe it or not, or theorize or question it, doesn't matter. She's what true courage is, along with everyone else that I've had on the show. And it was brilliant. What can I say? Anita Mojani, enjoy.
Book. People told me later that, oh, you should write about what happened. So I wrote about it and submitted it to a website but I didn't even put my full name on it. So it was called Anita M's NDE, meaning Anita M's near-death experience. And the people who own the website, which I sent it to, it was a near-death experience website, and they put my story on their home page because they said it was the, they said it was like the most fascinating one they had received or had ever read. And so they put it on the home page, and then it started to go viral. But I was writing it for myself because I was trying to make sense of what had happened to me, because I'd gone into this coma. And when I was in the coma, on the outside, like people looking at my physical body, I was just lying there, and I was dying, and the doctors said my organs had shut down and the cancer had ravaged through my whole body. And so literally I was in the final hours of life. But what people didn't know was that I felt amazing. My consciousness or spirit had actually left my physical body, and I felt so wonderful and light and free. And I felt as though I had entered like this state of clarity where I understood why I had the cancer. I understood how all the thoughts, decisions, emotions that I had experienced in my life had weighed down on me, on my physical body, and to the point where it led me to having cancer and lying there in that hospital bed dying on that day. And the clarity was incredible. Like, I understood why I had come into this life and how I had not followed my calling. And I understood what caused me to go off what I had intended to come here and do and be. And it was just really incredible, the clarity. And then I was given the choice to come into my physical body, to come back, or to stay on that side. And in my book, of course, I go on to explain how my dad was there to greet me, my deceased father, who I had a turbulent relationship with in life. But here in death, all I felt from him was pure, unconditional love and no judgment at all for that turbulent relationship that we'd had. You know, I'd always felt I'd let him down, but no, there was no judgment on this side. And so it was my dad that encouraged me that I need to go back and live my life fearlessly. He told me that it wasn't my time and that my husband Danny's purpose was linked to mine.
Amazing.
And I was, so eventually I made the choice to come back. But while I was in the coma, I was also aware of everything that was happening around my physical body. So when I came back, when I came out of the coma, I was able to tell people all the conversations they were having, what the doctor said, what the doctor did, and they were stunned. They were like, oh my gosh, how could you know you were in a coma? And I was telling them things that even happened outside the room, like beyond earshot. So they knew that something strange had happened. But within 5 weeks, the doctors could find no trace of cancer in my body, and they couldn't explain what had happened.
That's incredible. And the question, when you wrote it all down for yourself before the book came, were you nervous about how this was then going to be received, or what people think, or at that point did you not care anymore what kind of people thought? Or?
No. Well, you see, when I wrote it as if no one was going to read it. I wrote it purely for myself. And so when my brother actually showed me this website, this NDE website, and he said, look, people have these experiences, you know, where they come out of their body like what you did. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. So when I sent them my story and they said, can they publish it on their site? I actually said, yeah, go right ahead if you feel it'll help people, but maybe don't use my full name, because I wasn't sure how people were going to react. And I was already, like, when I would talk about it, even within my own community, I could tell people were like thinking, oh, she's a bit weird. Oh, it was the drugs messing with her head. I mean, they were all aware that the cancer had healed, and that was, you know, they were saying, oh my God, you've been touched by God, or, you know, that was, they knew that that was something really special that had happened. They knew I was lucky to be alive. So the physical healing was something that everybody could see, because they saw I walked out of the hospital 5 weeks later. But when I started talking about what it was that happened on the other side, that's when they said, oh, it must be the drugs that were just causing you to hallucinate. And I said, no, it wasn't. That, what I experienced on the other side, is what triggered the healing. And that's what people were skeptical about, you know, and they would say that, no, you know, maybe it was the drugs that healed you, or you're very lucky to be alive, but are you sure that, you know, they were skeptical about what I was saying about what I experienced on the other side.
Yeah.
And so what I was more concerned about is that if I keep sharing it, people are going to make me believe that it was my imagination, and I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want it to erode. It was, what I experienced was so beautiful. I felt that it was getting hard to share, so I stopped sharing it. And so when I let the people at the NDE website publish it, I said, don't use my real name, because I kind of wanted to keep it sacred within me and not like tell everybody in the world that this is what happened, this is what I experienced. I thought I will let them all interpret it in their own way. And people had different ways of interpreting it. You know, some people just felt that there probably is a medical explanation, even if we don't know it now. There will be one. There is one. Some people just felt, okay, it was a spontaneous remission. These things happen. So people just gave it their own explanation. But not everybody was ready to hear what I had to say.
Beautiful, guys. Thanks for tuning in today. If you made it this far to the end, well done. I hope you enjoyed that trip down memory lane as much as I did. I know it was a little self-indulgent, but at the same time, hopefully it's shown you a couple of episodes of podcasts that you may not have checked out that you'd want to go back in. And of course, my overall aim is to inspire you, inspire myself, inspire us all to live our best lives now, and long may it continue. And this is me basically wishing you as much gratitude, love, and all the best for 2019. Make it a memorable year. I truly feel life is very precious. We've been given this gift. Why not? You know, why not live on the fringes and make the most of it? That's what I'm trying to do anyway. And of course, I'm going to be doing lots of workshops. I've got big plans for 2019. I'm literally the 3 days before my first retreat that I'm running with the sound healer Matt Omo and Petra Brozovic, all part of Let It In, and it's sold out, which I'm absolutely humbled, and I'm excited to be bringing more things like that through 2019, where we can get into the real core of stuff and create some long-lasting change and live life fearlessly with courage, like everyone of these awesome people continue to talk about. And if you enjoyed this episode today, guys, tag me on Instagram, take a screenshot, anything, tell a friend, anything that's going to help spread the word and help me get this message out there. It's doing great. I love it, love every minute of it. And yeah, I really appreciate it, because without you tuning in and listening to this podcast and being part of this journey, I couldn't do it alone, you know. So that's what it boils down to. Anyway, here's to 2019. Have a fantastic day, week, wherever you are in the world.